happening like 20 minutes because Lekki is calling our names. A lot of us here. I have another meeting for 6 p.m. today, so I have to be Lekki as fast as possible. But thank you. We're going to be discussing affordability or accessibility and affordability. Those are very central issues with education. Yes. And you can talk about education from now until tomorrow, but if you don't deal with the issue of affordability or accessibility, then there's a stage of denial someone is going through. So discussants are going to be dealing, we're going to do a little bit of detail, but we're going to do it quick. I'd like to invite up on stage these amiable personalities. I'm sure some of you have met some of them before, but I'll introduce them quickly. I'll bring up on stage first a dear sister, Folawe Omikunle of Teach for Nigeria. Please welcome. I'll bring up also a dear friend of Cora Network, Dixon Sofo. Welcome, Dixon. This one I've never met, but I'll bring him up. Benga Latinwo, is he here? Ah, okay. Meeting you for the first time. And then finally we'll bring in a man of many parts. Okay, let me know.
I schooled in Nigeria in a public institution. And before I saw what is called the breadboard.
What?
Breadboard. If you are a physics student or engineering student, it was when I got to the university. You realize that we never had access to these things earlier on. Which means if you were supposed to be like on the 70 while you were in the university, a child that started earlier, maybe from the age of 5, 6, grade school, and was exposed to these simple technologies, you will definitely struggle with that kind of kid when you get into the university. They move up to the best thing. You try and play catch up. So what we do is we teach kids to be creators of technology and not just passive consumers. And we bring access to these kids on, I will call something equality. Like we go into private schools, we run these things as a subject, STEAM as a subject in private and public schools as well.
Awesome, awesome. I know you talk about STEAM, which is slightly, there's an augmentation to STEM, right?
Yes.
There. So the A
arts,
means arts.
Arts, yeah.
Excellent. So please, so in case some persons are thinking that they are trying to cook. Yes. Dixon, please. Please. Can you pass the microphone to you? Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So I run a payments platform. We just help businesses and individuals in Africa receive and send payments to anywhere in the world. Hello. Yeah, I'm not sure that's why I'm here. I probably am here because I created a failed company. So prior to this, many people know that I came up with the idea of the first ever educational tablet in Nigeria, which eventually evolved to be the movement for the CU tablets, and then so many other e-learning platforms in Nigeria before it failed woefully. So probably that's what I'll be speaking about. I know what doesn't work.
Awesome, yes. Akin?
All right. My name is Akin Kwelu. For the purpose of this platform, I'm the project director for a Rudio Hub, where we train and help to restore the dignity of teachers. So what we do is very, very similar to what Folawe, what she does. But if you went to school and you never studied anything education, we can help run a shift for you, or you graduated in education, but you learn some old stuff that are not relevant. So we help remove it from your head, and we're reshaping your head to see well, so that we don't have teachers by circumstance, so we have teachers by passion. So that's one part, and I've done over 1,000 of that in collaboration with some organization. Also, I do alternative education, where I train about 500 people yearly for free to learn what they would never get in the school on the early days. And just last month, just put up an incubation center, more like a hub for entrepreneurs, where I can incubate about 40 on a yearly basis. That's a little bit about what I do. Thank you.
Awesome, awesome. So you're hearing amazing things already. So what I'm doing is I'm going to split the sessions into two. We'll talk about accessibility first, then we'll come to affordability. Now, mid-80s, I don't know how many of us remember the guy called Professor Babs Fafunwa. Yes. 6334 system of education. You all are cognizant, you all know that. We still run 6334 system of education. Now, that was supposed to create some level of accessibility to the modern ways of teaching by ensuring that not just the traditional track of education, but vocation and all those things were introduced into the curricula, just to make education a bit more accessible also at some level. But we've seen the challenges with that over time. Now, in your experiences, in terms of your ventures which you've gone in, what do you think is the key problem with accessibility in education, given the different types of education, the different models of education? Now, where would you pinpoint the issue with accessibility? Before I'll ask a policy question in that regard. Anyone of you who wants to tackle that? Maybe Folawe.
Sure, yeah. So when I saw the topic that we'll be talking on, I thought, how do we make education accessible and affordable? My challenge with that topic is it's not about making education accessible and affordable. It's about making quality education affordable and accessible. And the reason why I say that is because I've been working in a couple of regions in Nigeria, and the one that stunned me recently was in northern Nigeria. And this was a school where an intervention had been made in this state where kids were not being fed. And so to create accessibility, kids were showing up in school. So this school that used to house a population of 3,500 students grew to about 30,000. And so a problem came where you just had this huge population, kids waiting to learn and wanting to learn just sitting there. So this school got a bit creative and then introduced shift, where they have a morning and afternoon shift. But the thing is, you have a classroom filled with 300 students, 400 students, where there's no teaching in such a classroom. And so one of the things that I've become so obsessed about is just the fact that it's unfair to say that for us to really make education quality, equitable, excellent for the Nigerian child is beyond the teacher. And I say this because at the core of the work that we're doing is leadership. There's several factors, there's such complexity, and it's such a systemic issue that just goes beyond having an excellent teacher in that classroom. For example, if the kids are not fed, if you have a child who comes in sick, that's not the teacher can't solve that. If you have an excellent teacher who is ready to teach, but there are no learning aids, the child doesn't have a notebook, he doesn't have a textbook, the teacher hasn't been paid in 3-6 months, those are issues that you can start to point at: governance, policy, health sector, curriculum, teacher training, how we recruiting the teachers, how we training them, how we supporting them. And so we've identified that it's such a complex issue that needs to be embraced in its full complexity.
But before you continue on that point now, the other thing I wanted to point now, there is the predominant thought that also exists in the policy space of Nigeria that we don't have enough schools. Is that true?
So I would say that we do not have enough schools. I mean, we have 13-point-something million kids out of schools. The schools haven't been improved as we've built them. So you go to some of the schools, yes, 40 kids could sit in the classrooms before, but now you have like 100 students in one classroom. We haven't really built schools as we should have. And so in a Lagos state, for example, there are only 1,700 plus public schools, secondary and primary. And then you have 18,000 private schools. So yes, they're not enough schools, but at the same time, I think with the issue of access, we need to get innovative. We need disruptors and social innovators who are going to use existing spaces. And I say this a lot. On every street in Lagos, you'll find a church. And most places as well across Nigeria. What are we doing with the churches and the mosque and all of these spaces that are not being used during the day? And so for me, I've become so obsessed with this. Let's get more of people like Larry, Folawe, all these people, Aderele, who is sitting here, who is a Teach for Nigeria fellow, who are passionate, committed to doing something, but with a sound and full understanding of what the issues and challenges are, so that they're able to create the solutions, they're able to think about how to use existing spaces to set up schools or to run schools. And so for me, it's just that we just need to create more social innovators, for the education system to tackle the different issues from the different angles and then start to just run with it.
Okay, I'm tempted to go into policy, but let me go to ask Benga. So Benga, in your experience, particularly in the North, from what you know, now I know that there is massive level of inequality in the North, particularly economic equality. Now, how do you deal with that challenge as it has to do with accessibility?
Okay.
I'm assuming that your services up there are affordable.
Yeah.
Okay.
For the private schools, I think this is predominant in most schools in Nigeria. We realized many private schools charge so much money, and as she said, you still don't have that quality education there. That quality is not there. And if we talk about for the North, out of the 30 million children out of school in Nigeria, 69% comes from the northern Nigeria. That 69% we're talking about, we've been to public schools where we wanted to run our program, and in one school we had 3,000 students. And in this 3,000, you will go to a classroom. Yes, some have desks. We went to a particular school, and there was only one teacher that we could relate with that can take on the whole school. Yeah, is that bad? Is that bad? These are realities. So when she was talking about we need more social innovators, this is part of Nigeria. We can criticize and sit down there. You know, a couple of months ago, the Emir made some statements which infuriated a whole lot of people. But he was speaking the truth. He comes from there and he sees the problem and he wants to tackle this problem. But he needs social drivers that will help him achieve this challenge.
Interesting. I taught as an NYSC a corporal in the North, primary school students ages 3 to 6. Yes, 3 to 6. Had no experience freaking. I literally 3 years to 6-year-olds who had spoke no word of English. And in 1 year, they started speaking English. So the problem was my other colleagues who were there, I had colleagues NYC who went to school, taught secondary school, the government secondary school. But when the time for WAEC came, the questions for WAEC had to be written in Hausa. So physics and all that stuff had to be written in Hausa. Now, in as much as I laughed at the time at that challenge, but that spoke to accessibility as well. Because, Frank, some of the concepts can be broken down into the local dialects. So, do you have any experience as it has to do with that language issue?
Yeah. We run a program, we have this Teamledge Limited that we run in private schools. Then we have this Teamledge Community, which any of our staffs, every week, they donate their free hours to go and teach in public schools. So the public schools, what we do is, the last one we did was in a school inside the Emir's Palace. And most of the kids couldn't communicate in English. GT Bank donated that particular and furnished that particular classroom. And we went there and said, okay, we were going to teach them some stuff in STEM education. And we were talking about fun electronics, we were talking about just simple block programming and all of that. And I got my colleagues that were very fluent in Hausa, and they were able to transfer this knowledge. The first thing is being able to communication is not in English. It's not only in English. That is why India is where they are today. That is why China is up. So we shouldn't be traditional about communication, right? And by the time we finished that, they were able to assemble a walking stick for the blind, just using simple Arduino boards and sensors. And they understood the concept that was behind it. And they were able to explain in their Hausa, and they were even able to present to the Emir.
So, challenge with accessibility, language. Falawe wants to say something about that quickly before I come to Dixon.
I'd just like to say something, and this has come from a visit yesterday that I made to one of our schools in Ikenne, Ogun State. So Teach for Nigeria, we currently have work in Lagos, Ogun State, and in Kaduna. So I went to Wesley Nursery and Primary School yesterday in Ikenne, and I was engaging with one of the fellows, had an incredible, energetic classroom. And so I was asking him, what has been your highlight? You know, what are your struggles? And what he said to me was, I'm in primary 3, and I'm teaching kids, I'm supposed to teach them math, English, science. But some of these kids can't even identify letters. So in my mind, I'm thinking what has happened with early years, etc. So I'm saying, what are your plans? What are you doing? How are you trying to get them, you know, to the next level? So he says he's been doing remedial classes. They've shortened the timetable again. But he says these kids go back home to their grandparents or to their parents who do not speak a word of English. Now, bear in mind that the National Policy on Education states that for teaching in primary 1 to 3, you teach in the mother tongue, the language of the community, of the environment. So he says, yes, that states it. He says, I can speak conversationally in Yoruba. He said, but I cannot teach without the resources to support my teaching in Yoruba, to teach the math, to teach the English. So yes, we have on policy all these documents and all of these things that we've written, which is with good intention. But how is it translating to how we're recruiting and posting the teachers? How is it translating to how the teachers are being trained? The learning materials and teaching materials that are being provided to enhance and support this teaching. So I think on policy, we've done something around there, but in implementing it and executing and making the materials available to actually be able to teach these children, you know, I think we still haven't gotten it. And I was speaking to, so this is a fellow of Teach for Nigeria who is excited and still committed to making sure that his kids learn. But I was speaking to an existing public school teacher who then said to me, they should just go and learn vocational skills. And I thought these are primary 1 to 3 kids, and they've already been written off because the system hasn't been able to deal with that issue. So
Dr. Steve, I think that's a very critical aspect of Edustart which should be addressed. That issue of accessibility as it has to do with language. Let me come to you, Dixon. Now, I know that you have in time past tried to deal with the issue of accessibility through technologies. Now, can you give us an idea of what was behind the thinking of that and why it didn't succeed?
Yeah, so the...
sorry, I wouldn't say that again. It's not that why it didn't succeed and why it got stuck where it did.
He actually failed. You know, like,
I'm not going to be one to say failure.
You know the funny thing, when I travel and I speak, I introduce myself. I have 4 badge of honors, 4 failed companies. So it gives me some props, you know. So I see the bright side of it. I just know what not to do. So so for a start, like when the design thinking and the creation of the company was going out, we just believed that if we created a tablet with internet access and e-learning platform in it, many people will buy it or many people will use it. We were really wrong. And the truth is that the market specimen for that kind of solution is only the middle and upper class. Middle and upper class is less than 20% of the population. So while she was speaking, I was just thinking about it. What are we really talking about accessibility about? Is it for the lower level, for the higher level education, right? You cannot tackle two of them the same way, right? So for instance, look at these kids. They've not come to an age of consciousness. So there's no way.
You'll be shocked. You'll be shocked.
But there's no way for, yeah, maybe they know how to do 1 or 2 things. There's no way for them to be a perfect example of frog through technology. And if you remember back in the day when they say you're computer literate, it literally means you can use Microsoft Word and you worked on a desktop. It evolved laptop and now it's phone. Children that are born that never use desktops and they're all using, so that's leapfrogging. So Africa is the only continent with the potential to leapfrog through technology, but we can't leapfrog through them, which now brings the main issue of policy and government, corruption, leadership. They are the only ones that I really think that can fix this issue in terms of like the programs she's running and the program he's running in collaboration with the government. Now, the issue I think that can be fixable on a personal base. Like for instance, when I was actually manufacturing those phones in China, all of them didn't go to school. everyone who manufactured those like tablets for my company didn't go to school, right? I was in factory with them. What happened was they went through YouTube courses, and they did those courses for like 3 months, and every one of them, like, they could chunk out 10,000 phones a day, 10,000 devices a day. So now taught me there's a new level of education. Like, even me, like, when I go, so after my company's, I got a job, right? So I went to work at the UN, literally for free. So when I was working, I learned my job through YouTube as well, right? Using videos. And I became really good in like 6 months. And then I jumped out, started doing it in another company. And then that taught me like the power of e-learning. I think from a middle range level where people get to a high level of consciousness, they could take their own learning themselves. And that's where we have to advocate for the use of technology. Now, that's in the bit of accessibility. When you talk about quality education, a problem of this lower end. But in quality education, there's a whole, trust me, the quality education out there online, if an individual downloads, his head will explode, right? So there's enough quality materials out there for free or for a little token. And I think the goal should be, how can the infrastructure support free and cheap internet for people to be able to access this stuff, right? So for me, for access, I think it's no more, like, access is for a mid-range level student to own their own learning for the rest of their life can be done through like use of e-learning platform.
Awesome. Now, I think Folawe succeeded in sort of arcing this conversation towards more quality, conversations about accessibility. So I think, Akin, I'd like you to talk about that in the sense that how have you driven the quality mindset in the persons that you brought in, going through the process that having to reset their minds, from what they've known before, and to introduce them to better learnings or better learning techniques, and then better delivery techniques as well, from your experience.
I think that it involves all the stakeholders, whether the teachers, the parents, the students, the schools, and yeah. But for the teachers, I think they flogged that already. The quality of the teacher is important. Now we have lesser schools. The population is increasing. You have about 1,000 people or 2,000 particular school, and see a teacher taking on about 3. I ask myself a question. How is the teacher going to differentiate? There's something called differentiation in learning. When you want to differentiate the children that you're teaching, whether it's cognitive, whether they're audio learners or visual learners or it's kinesthetics or something, how does the person plan from the design, from the lesson design, from the lesson plan? How do you deal with 1,000 people? How do you deal with 500 people? So the challenge is quite enormous. So you look at that. How many teachers have the right information for what they are doing now? How many of them give what they call quality lesson plans or lesson designs? How many of them really communicate? How many of them get feedbacks to be sure that these children are actually learning? Or at the end of the day, you say these ones don't know anything and these ones are failure, or probably because we did not, like I always say, that if a student fails, it's not because he doesn't know anything, it's because the teacher has not been able to find the way that the child likes to learn. So there's a whole lot that happens there. So, and the teachers will miss it there. And at the same time, if we don't have enough schools, can we think of alternative education where we can use a little bit of technology and a little bit of e-platforms to get this thing done? So, for example, the people who manufactured the tabs you used, they learned somewhere for 3 months and they started doing all of that. That's education. That's learning. It doesn't have to be schooling. It doesn't have to be 4 walls. I mean, so education is not the same as staying in a 4 wall. So, for example, you can have alternatives where you've been able to do a little analysis on the child, maybe you run some software, this is what the child should do as it were, and this is what the child wants to do. Can the person you want to learn photography, for example, I could go to a photography school for 6 months or 1 year. I mean, this is something I've tried, and I've seen. I can tell you that I know close to about 50 of them who are into that kind of thing, and they probably would never need to go to a school to do that. And learning is taken, because if you're going to talk about solving the enormous problems we have in education, many people will never get this thing done. So parents are still there too. So you find out that those who can't even speak any word in English language and that they communicate with, what if you have a teacher who can speak your language? You get back home to your grandparents or to the people that you are serving, and you come back the next day, like some of us saw while we were serving. Reginald said that. So what I hear when I was serving is Sai and all of that. That's all they try to remember. They can't really communicate the things you taught them some few days. So the idea is, when we talk about the accessibility, I think that we need to first look at the problems existing. Then how do we practically, I mean, the solution has to be something practicable and not just saying, oh, the teachers need this. So it comes from the stakeholders, the teachers, the students, the environment itself. That's the way I want to pick it from.
All right. I would, because of time, I would have actually loved to talk about the devolution of the education sector in Nigeria in terms of, should it be a federal concern, should it be a state, a local concern, from your perspective, given some of your experiences. However, let me quickly jump into affordability now. Now, what's the relationship between money and education? Because education, we know, first starts from your house. Understand? And if that foundation is wrong, you can correct that in the school if you have a great teacher who can begin the process of inspiring that child to learn. Now, but in the Nigerian context and from your experience, what's been the impact of financing in education? Now, is it, okay, let me explain this way so that everyone can, now, I'd like to sort of, you have 3 variables that equal great learning. You have the parents, you have the teachers, and then you have the infrastructure, which I like to combine. There could be other little variables, but these 3 major variables. Now, the infrastructure, of course, also involves money going into it. Now, to what extent does that variable determine the outcome is what I really want to know, so that we know what your recommendations are in terms of how, the funding system can help to impact education. Yeah, I'll start from you.
All right. I think that education is education anywhere. Learning is learning anywhere. The only variation that money will probably bring is exposure, and that's a whole lot. So, for example, somebody who is less than average, who is in a particular village, who is learning something in electrical